I was in St. Anthony, standing at the foot of the lighthouse. I walked closer to the cliff's edge, zipping my coat further up my neck, pulling my chin in like a turtle to protect against the fierce North Atlantic wind. Looking down past my boots, rocking in the swell below, was a pale blue iceberg, the first I had seen in person. As I looked down upon her, I wondered how big she had been when she started her journey. I knew she had been part of a glacier or the Greenland ice sheet, and that she had calved or broken off, pulling and shearing away from the wall of ice as if sliced by a giant dull serrated knife, rumbling, thundering, cracking as she joined the ocean. It took thousands of years for her to be formed, one snowflake at a time. She became a monolith of precipitation trapped in compacted ice. Now free to drift, she will embark on a journey that will take her 2 to 3 years to complete. She will travel 1,800 nautical miles, melting her way into the North Atlantic. Riding the Labrador Current southward, she and her ice island kin will pass the eastern coast of Newfoundland, an area where each spring a parade of icebergs strut their stuff like fan-plumed peacocks through Iceberg Alley. But they are not content to hang offshore. They like to come in close and show off for the neighbors. Sculpted by the forces of nature, seawater warmer than herself will nibble away at her keel, the hidden mass below the surface. Waves will lick at her from the waterline, leaving wave-cut notches in her sides. The wind will eat at her bite by bite, and the sun's radiation will dissolve her like sugar on the tongue. Bits of her will crumble and fall, sometimes splashing in the ocean, other times landing on her own shelf. Eroded by the forces of nature, her remaining curves and sharp angles are lopsided and top-heavy. Her buoyancy shifts, gravity pulls at her, beckoning her down. She rocks, and she rolls, and she flips all the way over, capsizing. The portion of her that was submerged is now exposed to the atmosphere. She regains her balance, and the process of erosion starts again. But she is not simply floating along like a bird with nowhere to be. She's busy. She's releasing fresh water and nutrients into the ocean around her. Her freshwater will cool and sink as it becomes dense with salt. Down it will go into the deep convection of the ocean conveyor belt, a system of constant motion and mixing that shuttles massive currents around the globe, pulling warm surface waters downward and pushing cold, deep waters upwards. Starting in the North Atlantic, driven by currents and time, her sunken waters will resurface again in about 1,000 years as nutrient-rich upwelling in the Pacific and Southern Oceans. She attracts life with the nutrients she releases, such as iron. She creates a rich feeding ground in an otherwise nutrient-poor area of the ocean. Phytoplankton and krill bloom in her presence. Fish, seabirds, and marine mammals are drawn to her like a fairy tale grandmother with a pocket full of sweets. But as in so many fairy tales, she has a dark side. She can be stubbornly unmoving and destructive. When her keel is deep enough and the sea floor is shallow enough, she can come to a grounding halt. For a time, she is stuck, but eventually the forces of erosion will whittle her down, freeing her to resume her journey towards the North Atlantic. Her keel, dragging along the bottom like a giant plow tilling the seabed, eradicates the sessile creatures in her path. Gouges are carved into the seafloor, and the benthic ecosystem is reset. In the aftermath of her scouring event, which varies in size and frequency, a mosaic garden of communities, each in different stages of recovery, will be built on the seafloor. Pioneer species will move in to set up shop next to older, established communities. Her journey comes to an end after traveling southward, where she has calved and giving nutrients and fresh waters, steadily being shaped and transformed along the way, until she is no longer a drifting giant, but simply a drop in an ocean current. Icebergs are not just ice cubes melting in the drink. They are not merely ship hazards. They are a main character in the stories of our oceans. They are drifting ecosystems that support marine life. They contribute freshwater and nutrients to our ocean. And although they are giants, they are vulnerable. Rising global temperatures are altering iceberg formation, melt rates, marine ecosystems, and the ocean conveyor belt. As glaciers retreat further and further inland at an accelerated pace, their ice front will no longer be over the ocean, resulting in reduced or halted iceberg production, which in turn has a negative cascading effect on the ocean systems that icebergs support. Another consequence of the loss of icebergs in our ocean is their influence on the ocean conveyor belt. If icebergs melt too fast from rising global temperatures, the large amounts of fresh water they release slows the mixing. The less dense fresh water remains on the surface instead of sinking into the ocean conveyor belt. If the icebergs are not present to regulate this deep sea currents, the ocean conveyor belt slows. The disruption in the mixing of warm and cold water affects the entire system. If the conveyor belt slows, nutrient upwelling does not take place, which impacts marine life, starting with phytoplankton and moving up the marine trophic web. The story I just told you is part of Drifting Giants, an interactive multimedia story map that I created for my capstone project. The aim of Drifting Giants is to educate the public about the role that icebergs play in our ocean system. I chose to create the story map as a medium to convey the importance of icebergs because story maps are designed to guide audiences through a web-based narrative experience that integrates elements such as videos, photographs, maps, and informational text, all into a cohesive story that can be accessed through a web browser. I also chose to make a story map because it is a standalone resource. I designed this project with the visitors to aquariums and natural history museums in mind, with the goal of making complex oceanographic concepts approachable in an interactive and educational way. My hope is to inspire ocean stewardship through the use of storytelling that highlights the interconnectedness of the ocean. This is an example from the story map as well. The Drifting Giants will also be featured on the Iceberg Ecosystem website and be made available for cruise ship passengers to view. I plan to develop proposal materials to adapt this project for educational and community outreach programs for aquariums, museums, and other educational venues. Drifting Giants is comprised of original video footage and photographs that I captured during fieldwork in Newfoundland. As I began my research into icebergs, I quickly realized that I could not tell their story if I had not experienced them firsthand. So in early May of this year, I traveled to Iceberg Alley in Newfoundland to gather this footage. I visited St. Anthony's Bight, and Twillingate. I made other stops along the way too because the distances between those are quite great. More than 9-hour drive, especially during pothole season, which it was while I was there. I used 3 different methods to capture the videos and photographs that are used on Drifting Giants and that were shown here today. I used an Insta360 camera with a 4K lens, my iPhone, and a mini drone. And out of the 3 devices that I lugged all around Newfoundland, my phone was the most reliable. When I started the NBC program last summer, I had no idea that I would be flying a drone, let alone around an iceberg parked in a cove of Newfoundland. It has been a transformative year, to say the least. I would like to take a moment to thank my capstone committee, Maria, Carolina, and Tammy, for all their guidance, without which this project would not have come into being. I would also like to thank the Julia R. Brown Fund, whose support made the trip to Newfoundland possible. And I also want to send a special shout out to Hannah Tenenbaum for repeatedly helping to keep the wheels on my crazy cart. If you would like to see Drifting Giants yourself, you can follow this QR code, and there's also links to the Iceberg Ecosystem website. Thank you. Are there any questions?
I was surprised to hear that icebergs flip over. I would think that the top would be less dense, have some porosity, and the bottom would be denser, and therefore it would be stable in that orientation. Why do they flip?
They flip because under the surface, the seawater is eating at them, and it erodes the bottom until the buoyancy shifts. And then that's what causes them to flip, is because gravity is pulling on them, and their buoyancy and density has changed, and then they'll flip. And then the process of erosion from underneath starts over again, and they melt and they go into the ocean.
Great presentation. I just had a quick question about your original infographics. They were so great. I was just wondering how you created those.
I took the results of the research I did, and I fed it into AI image generation, and then spent hours and hours and hours correcting it because it was always wrong. But yeah, that's how I made them.
It looks great.
Thank you.
Good job.
The pictures are so stunning, and I love the storytelling, just really making the story of these icebergs accessible. Did you take all those photos?
Yes, I did. I took all the photos, all the drone footage,
Amazing.
all of it. I took all of it, yeah. And there's more video footage and stuff on the website.
Oh, we've got a question all the way in the back.
Thanks so much for this great presentation. I'm curious about your fieldwork setup and whether I know you weren't doing research on maybe anything living, but did you need to obtain permits for any of the iceberg drone work that you were doing, and whether you commissioned boats on your own or if you were joining pre-existing research vessels that were going out in that part of the world already?
So in Twillingate, I just took one of their iceberg tours. I was like, I'm a citizen scientist today, and I took one of those tours. When I was in St. Anthony's, because the sea ice was still packed in, they weren't running boats, but they were right there on the cliffs, like the ones you saw by the houses. That's just St. Anthony Bight, like that's just the neighborhood. So I didn't have to travel far.
Oh, all right. We are going to, thank you so much for that, Amber.